Hey guys, it's Bang for About PC Gamer here. As we all know, the Fury X has finally been released, the long awaited AMD Fury X. This card has been spoken about for at least a year and a half. We've been waiting for its arrival. We've been told it would have this new high bandwidth memory that was very fast, that had a massive bandwidth. And for a lot of us, we were thinking, well, this is going to change gaming pretty much at high resolutions. Now, obviously, earlier this year, Nvidia released the GTX Titan X. Great performance over the GTX 980. Way too expensive, in my opinion. Just one of those cards for the super rich, really, and just for the people who want the absolute best and money's no object. 2 weeks pending to the R9 Fury X's release, Nvidia come out with the GTX 980 Ti, which we all know is a slightly cut version of the Titan X. It has 6 GB of VRAM instead of 12, and it has a few less shaders as well. But the performance, to everyone's surprise, was pretty much neck and neck. You couldn't really justify the Titan X's price after the performance of the GTX 980 Ti. But anyway, what I really want to talk about is, now that the Fury X is here, and we obviously we've all seen the benchmarks. If you haven't, I'm gonna show you a few in a moment. What do you guys think of it? I want to promote some constructive criticism on both companies. I mean, if you don't like Nvidia, whatever. If you don't like AMD, whatever. But let's just look at the performance. Let's look at the facts, and let's really talk about what's going to happen next. Really, is it a win for AMD or is it a win for Nvidia? Because there's a few things that concern me at the moment, and what concerns me the most is the Fury X has a few drawbacks to it. It doesn't support HDMI 2.0, and if you don't know, the significance of that is, it means if you have a 4K TV that obviously does 4K, if you do not have the HDMI 2.0 standard, you will not be able to enjoy a 60 frames per second refresh rate, a 60 Hz refresh rate. So that means regardless of the performance numbers your card's pushing out, you're not going to enjoy that smooth frame rate. And because this is such a small factor design, this would appeal to loads of people for a media PC or a mini ITX build, which you could just have under your TV and run it on your 4K monitor. The fact that they don't support HDMI 2.0 is quite a massive, it's a massive blow, to be honest. It's gonna make few people think about it. The second is it doesn't come with native DVI-D or dual link DVI. So a lot of people with their 144 Hz monitors are basically leaving them scratching their heads thinking, well, we got connectivity issues now. So that's another thing people are going to have to start considering. And the last thing is, obviously, it's got an all-in-one cooler. I know it does work pretty well. From what I've seen, it does keep the card within the medium 60 degrees at very full load, and it just kind of limits the amount of people that will buy it, because most people nowadays have an all-in-one cooler on their CPU, like a Corsair H50, H60 or something like that. And you know, unless you've got space for mounting on your roof and mounting at the back of your case, it's, for most people, it's going to look pretty messy. So it's another issue I have with the card personally. And third is just the performance in general. I'm going to show you some benchmarks now. So this is a site called BitTech. I'll use a link in the description in a minute. So they're running Alien Isolation at 1920 by 1080. I know this is for someone who's going to buy either the GTX 980 Ti or the AMD R9 Fury X. It's definitely a resolution you're not really too worried about, but the fact is, if you own a 120Hz monitor or 144Hz monitor, you may actually consider it. And to see the performance difference between the two cards at the lower resolutions was pretty shocking for me, to be honest. I didn't think that high bandwidth memory wouldn't be very effective at the lower resolutions. Obviously this changes as we start to crank up the resolution, but some people still want to play at these resolutions at very high refresh rates, so it's another thing that's gonna turn a few people off. So as you can see now on Alien Isolation at 1920 by 1080 is the Fury X averaging 145 when the GTX 980 Ti is averaging 178, which is a considerable difference. Now we move up to 2K 1440p, should I say, and the gap, it's not as much, but it's still there. We move up to 4K, and shockingly the GTX 980 Ti is still ahead. But obviously this is where the high bandwidth memory does do a better job at the high resolutions. This is where it should be strong, but at the same time I think we all expected the Fury X to kind of wipe the floor with a 980 Ti at least and be trading blows with the GTX Titan X. So let's move on to another game. So this is Battlefield 4. It's been around for a while, we all know it. Again, we see the same thing at 1080p for GTX 980 stretching its legs pretty much over the Fury X on average frames per second. We move up the resolution, it's still almost a 10 frames per second gap, and then we bring it to a 4K resolution and the Fury X is still behind, which is pretty shocking if you ask me, because for a very long time now it has been told, it has been basically being presented as the 4K gaming card. Basically it was going to change, it was basically just going to allow 4K at brilliant frame rates, and from what I can see here this doesn't seem to be the case. If it's getting beaten up by GTX 980 Ti, which in terms of technology I think is actually inferior to it. If you really look at how the Fury X has been built with stacked 3D memory and massive bandwidth and 8 teraflops of single precision compute power with over 4,000 stream processors, and I would have expected a lot more from this. On paper the Fury X looks absolutely amazing, but it really is not showing that when it comes to performance, and I have to say it's underwhelming. You cannot deny that. So let's move on from Battlefield 4 and we'll have a look at Crysis 3 again. At the 1080p there's about a 10 frames per second difference here. Well, I'll say 8 if we really want to be very accurate about it. Very close when it comes to 2K at 1440p, not much in it, and at 4K there's pretty much nothing to say here. It's 1 or 2 frames per second, but still the HBM not showing any difference. It's not showing us anything new, and I think that's the most disappointing thing. If we move on to Grand Theft Auto 5, which is obviously a massive game for quite a lot of people right now. I thoroughly enjoyed it when I played it. At 1080p you can see the 980 Ti running away with it completely. So if you've got a 120Hz monitor, you're going to be looking at this and you're going to have a decision to make. At 1440p, not so much of a difference. You see HBM clawing back. You also have to look at the minimum frame rate, which is considerably lower as well, so that's something to consider. And at 4K, again, it's still behind the 980 Ti. Nothing worth shouting about, obviously. It's only 2 frames per second, but it's still behind, and it shouldn't be in terms of what we've seen on the specs. So is this driver related? Is it because the drivers are so much into their infancy that AMD just can't really access the true potential of the Fiji core at the moment? I really hope so, because both of these cards now are selling for £509 in the UK. I don't really know what that translates into other currencies. So obviously you guys can take that number and do the math yourselves, but you need to understand that these cards are the same price at the moment. It really makes you have to choose between which one benefits you the most. And AMD are known for selling the card at a lower price point and pretty much almost getting the same performance or just a little bit lower, and then you put price to performance into consideration, and AMD usually wins in that situation. But now Nvidia have just kind of broken all their own rules and dropped their recently released 980 Ti. It's not even 3 weeks old yet, and they've dropped it by, I bought mine for 575. Now they're selling the card for 509. They've dropped it ridiculously within a few weeks only, and I just think they've done that just to spoil the Fury X and the AMD's party, really. I think that these prices won't stay. They may stay for a few weeks, but you really have to, if you're one of those people that have waited all this time to choose between the two cards, you really have to make a really big decision, because it's still quite a lot of money, and it's a very big investment. So let's move on to Shadow of Mordor. We know this game uses a ridiculous amount of VRAM, but at 1080p, not much in it, 8 frames per second, and we're starting to see a trend now. It's usually between 10 and 8 frames per second at the lower resolutions. We crank it up to 1440p, we only see a 3 frames per second difference, and at 2K, at 4K, the Fury X edges out the 980 Ti by a single frame, and obviously you can even put that down to run tolerance, and it may win, it may draw sometimes. So I don't know, I'm kind of just not disappointed, because the performance is still great, but underwhelmed. That's the word everyone's been using. I've seen it all today, underwhelmed, and I think that sums it up perfectly. It's been hyped up so much, and we thought it would at least come with like a performance increase of at least 20% over the 980 Ti, and somewhere between 5 and 10% of the Titan X for a cheaper price, and that, for me, that would have been a victory for AMD. But looking at this now, you have to really have to wonder now, did they wait too long to bring this out? Had they brought this out in, say, February, when we all expected it to come out, then things may have been a little bit different. They may have clawed back a lot of that market share, because the 980 Ti was not around. The Titan X would have been its only competitor at a £1,000 price point, and everyone would have flocked to the Fury X, really. But they waited and waited and waited until basically Nvidia played their hand, and when AMD responded, they haven't really done so in the best way, if you really ask me. So looking at the Witcher 3, I don't really want to take these benchmarks too seriously. We all know the Witcher 3 is a very heavily Nvidia optimized game. Even though GameWorks is not being used, I still think every GameWorks game kind of cripples AMD. So I'm going to not look at these too much, but obviously you do get better performance with the GTX 980. Not so much of a difference between the two cards in 4K. So I guess HBM is it is showing its potential, but we all expected a bit more. Okay, I'm going to skip the benchmarks, because there's benchmarks are benchmarks and they're not games, really. I just want to talk about the Fury X overclocking. BitTech were able to push this card to 1130 MHz, so an 80 MHz increase over the 1050 MHz base clock that you get. And what's shocking is you don't really see a change in performance. I mean, you get a 1 frames per second increase in Battlefield 4, you get a 1 frames per second increase in Shadow of Mordor, and your Unigine Valley score only goes up by 200 points. This has to be pretty concerning, because we all know that the GTX 980 Ti reference or non-reference overclocks really well. I think I can honestly say almost everyone that owns a 980 Ti can achieve 1400 megahertz. I personally own one, and my one does between 1430 megahertz up to 1460 almost in every game, and that's with a reference card, so you have to bear that in mind. Okay, so I'm just going to wrap this up now and ask you guys, what do you guys think of the Fury X? Are you disappointed? If you had the choice between the two cars, which one would you get? Why would you go with the Fury X over the GTX 980 Ti? Just basically tell me what your thoughts are on the current situation between the Fury X and the GTX 980 Ti. As I said, try and keep it constructive. I understand thoroughly that it's quite, the brand loyalty thing it's a tribal affair basically. Everyone's very passionate about the cards they buy and the companies they back, but let's try and be constructive and just talk about the performance, and let's talk about the facts. And yeah, that's just, I wanted to talk about the card. Obviously I don't have one, and if you can look at the expected time of arrival in the UK, one of the biggest retailers over here, which is Overclockers, won't have one until the 17th of July. So absolutely shocking. If I wanted this card, I would be waiting longer still. So if you do have a Fury X on launch day, congrats to you. You obviously know someone, or you are just watching until the stock was updated and you bought it instantly. So congratulations to you if you've got one. And if you do have one, let me know what you think about it personally. Reviews are reviews, but I would want to know your personal opinion on the card as well. But anyway guys, that's pretty much it for me. I've rambled on enough. I just feel kind of underwhelmed by the Fury X. I feel that I expected more basically. Obviously it's still a very high performing card at least 1440p, not so much at 1080p, but I think we all expected more, and I think that's very fair to say. And let's just hope with future driver updates, because obviously Fiji's quite young, we can see an improvement in performance. So anyway, that's enough from me, and hope you guys enjoyed the video.